Hello, welcome and thanks for taking the time to join us today. I'm Charlie Imbergamo, Director of Strategic Programs for the Nonprofit Leadership Center. Our NLC team is continuing our commitment to develop and connect leaders across our region to strengthen our communities. A few weeks back, in preparation for one of our first webinars, our communication caught the attention of the Lutheran Services of Florida team. We're delighted to join forces with LSF's team today to bring this webinar to you. The global pandemic we're living together has brought out significant challenges for all of us. Concerns around preparedness, capacity to respond, the risk of sickness and death, financial strife, ongoing economic volatility, questions around our communal and individual responsibility, decidedly centering necessarily around physical health. Largely uncharted, though, in the mainstream are the conversations around our baseline and ongoing mental health. As we know, mental health challenges in our society are often stigmatized. Today, we're acting boldly and courageously, and we're prepared to address those issues. Once again, it's a privilege for us to welcome you into this space. To recognize and celebrate the organizations you represent, I'd ask you to locate the chat box and to type the name of your organization in the chat right now. And for all of us watching, as we see the names of the organizations pop up in our feed, take a moment to recognize the incredible potential for good in our community through each of you and your organizations. Go ahead and take a moment to locate the chat box and type your organization's name in there now. We're incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Christine Cauffield as a guest presenter with us today. Dr. Cauffield has served as president and CEO of organizations providing integrated health services for children through seniors with a particular focus on folks in crisis. She currently serves as CEO of LSF Health Systems, the managing entity comprising 62 behavioral health care organizations that span a 23-county region. The agency has a large client base, underscoring the need for this conversation and her passion to engage with us in it today. Dr. Cauffield completed her doctoral degree in clinical psychology from Florida Institute of Technology and completed her internship and postdoctoral residency at Harvard Medical School. She's the chair of the Florida Association of Managing Entities, president of the Florida Council on Aging, and serves on the executive committees of Brain Injury Association of Florida and Smart Justice of Florida. Dr. Cauffield is a Leadership Florida alumna. She's a passionate healthcare advocate and clearly eminently qualified to be with us today. Moderating today's call is my teammate, Karina Kletter, NLC's program associate. We simply would not be able to undertake this work without Karina's diligence, attention to detail, and her commitment to our sector. She'll take us through some rules of the road as we engage today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlie, and thank you to everybody that's on this call with us today. Just a few rules of the road for the call. To minimize background noise and distractions, all lines will be muted for the duration of the webinar. The session is being recorded and will be available on our website for future viewing. We'll also share the slides with everybody. We warmly welcome your questions. Please type them in the chat box. Dr. Cauffield will take about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of her presentation to take questions. If you haven't found the chat box yet, go to the settings at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on chat. We're looking forward to a productive, engaging session, and thank you so much for your participation. Take it away, Dr. Cauffield.
Thank you so very much, Karina and Charlie. It's such an honor to be with all of you today. And I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, you'll have more tools in your toolbox to really shore up your own mental health. I want to start by saying that we are experiencing the probably most life-altering event that many of us have experienced in our lifetimes. And if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling isolated and really out of sorts, you're not alone. And we're going to be discussing some tools that can help with this pandemic and navigating us through so that our mental health will remain intact. So next slide, please. So the American Psychiatric Association recently completed a survey and asked people, how is the COVID-19 pandemic affecting your mental health and your well-being? And I wanted to share some of those reactions, some of those responses. So if you see 48% are anxious about the possibility of contracting the virus, 40% of us are anxious about becoming seriously ill or dying from COVID-19, 62% are anxious about possibly losing a friend or loved one, and 36% of Americans believe that the pandemic is having serious impact on their mental health. So as you can see, I'm sharing these stats. So again, if you're experiencing these same feelings, you're not alone. Next slide, please, for some more stats. 59% report it's having a serious impact on everyday life. 57% concerned about serious impact on financials. 68% are worried about long-lasting effect on the economy, and 50% are worried about running out of food, medicine, or other supplies. And I want to talk a little bit before we go to the next slide about anxiety and the difference between stress and anxiety, because we're often asked that question here at LSF. And stress is best understood as a reaction that presents itself physically. And it manifests in the body, and you may experience a racing heart, sweaty palms, upset stomach. And it's what arises when something we care about is at stake. And it really can escalate our fight or flight syndrome. And what that does in the body is experiencing a threat, and it automatically sends us the fight or flight response. Cortisol floods our body, and we are ready for the attack, if you will. And that's very important if it's an acute situation and you have to run from a very dangerous situation. But when we're in this pandemic situation, this has been a chronic issue for us. And so if we are constantly in that fight or flight mode, it's very dangerous for our health, because what happens is when that cortisol enters our body, it actually lowers our immune system. And what we're really going to talk about today is ways that we can reduce our stress, reduce our anxiety, so that we can remain as healthy as possible as we all move forward. So what's the difference between stress and anxiety? Well, with anxiety, it basically manifests both physically and mentally. And so it is unhelpful thinking patterns that we experience when our mind fixates on threats, uncertainty, and negativity. So we're going to be talking a lot today about the importance of really minding our thoughts, because we can actually create a fight or flight response by just catastrophizing, if you will, with thoughts that may or may not be true. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But anxiety can occur on its own as a response to stress, or it can trigger stress. And again, when we are responding to stress with the anxiety, it can intensify the stress. And in worst cases, it can lead to panic attacks. So it's really important for us to understand that we're not able to control when anxiety occurs. It's a natural reaction to a very unnatural situation, and it really is our brain's automatic survival mechanism. So it's a normal response to very abnormal situations. So what we want to do today is learn how to manage that anxiety so it can help us and further eliminate those unhelpful reactions. So talk a little bit about control now. We need to be focused on what we can control in this situation and what we can't control. For example, what we can control is our ability to build our own resilience. And again, we're going to be chatting more about that. We're going to be able to control how much we watch television, how much news overload, media overload is occurring in our lives. We can control our own routines. We can control our ability to eat well, seek and offer support. We can control what's important to us, and so on. What we can't control are other people's decisions, other people's health, the news media, the government's actions, schools opening or closing, the state of the healthcare system, flights and holidays being canceled, traffic, public transport, aging, the weather. These are some things that we can't control. And so we want to really focus now more than ever as we move through this together on what we can control. What we find is that people that experience anxiety have actually been shown to have a very low tolerance for uncertainty. So you can imagine that the pandemic is full of uncertainties, and people with anxiety are really, really struggling to maneuver. So it's really worth reminding all of us that uncertainty is an inescapable part of life. And the sooner we become comfortable with that fact, the sooner we can reduce our mental suffering. So next slide, please. So let's look at how this pandemic has disrupted our lives. Most of us now are working from home. We're juggling home schooling. Many of us have children, and they're now at home 24/7. We are isolated from our friends, our loved ones, our colleagues. Many of us are at risk or have lost our jobs, or our loved ones have lost their job. We're struggling with the conflicting media stories, media overload. We're really dealing now with relationship change with our partners, our children. Next slide, please. And when we think of all these major changes that occurred very, very suddenly in our lives, we also remind ourselves that human beings are creatures of habit, and we really strive for a sense of control. And right now, everything, it seems, in our life is out of control. And so when we experience that loss of homeostasis or loss of balance, and I want to talk a little bit about homeostasis or balance. Every single cell in our body strives for homeostasis. And when we're off balance, the body literally kicks into a self-healing mode to try to bring us back to equilibrium. And so when we're out of balance, it really can be felt on a mental, physical, and spiritual levels. And so some of the symptoms that we all have been experiencing are changes in our eating patterns. People are reporting that it's almost like the college freshman 15-pound gain. People are eating more to self-soothe, if you will, or out of boredom. Other people do the opposite. They're so anxious and or feeling depressed that they're not eating as much and they're seeing a weight loss. Many are experiencing insomnia, changes in sleep patterns as a result of their anxiety, their rumination. Some are experiencing concentration difficulties, extreme fatigue. Those that have chronic health problems are reporting that they're finding that their symptoms are worsening. People are also reporting that they are increasing their use of alcohol and other drugs. In fact, a recent report showed that there's been a 55% increase in liquor sales as this pandemic is now among us. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because that is not a healthy coping strategy. And as we know, alcohol is a depressant. So it might give you a momentary feel-good feeling of a temporary high. But once you come down off that alcohol high, it actually is a depressant. So we don't need any more depression in our lives right now. Again, we talked about people experiencing anxiety and or depression and grief responses. We're grieving the loss of the old. We're not, many of us, really adjusting quite well to the new normal. And we're grieving all of the things that we have lost during this period of time. And so some of the grief responses are denial. And I'm not surprised that even though we have been told to stay at home, wear a mask, wash hands, etc., there are some people that are not abiding by those recommendations. And I think a large part can be attributed to the denial. This can't be happening. There's not any factual information. I don't believe it. And also with some of the grief responses come frustration, come anger, come sadness. And so again, I can't emphasize enough that if you are experiencing these symptoms, these feelings, they're quite normal and natural during this very unprecedented time. Next slide, please. Some of our at-risk groups that we really want to be mindful of and reach out are to the elderly, those with chronic diseases, children and teens, our healthcare providers, and our first responders. They're particularly at risk for experiencing an enhanced issues around this pandemic. Next slide. So what are some things that we can do to help us cope better with what's going on in our daily lives? Well, I mentioned it earlier. We need to take breaks from the media, including social media. There's no need to keep CNN News on 24/7. I think that you can strategize with listening to the news, perhaps in the morning, maybe 30 minutes, maybe at dinner time, and then cut it off, because people are reporting at LSF that keeping that television on, that radio, constantly checking social media for updates is actually increasing anxiety. We want to take deep breaths. Breathe, breathe, breathe. That lowers our autonomic system and allows us to really stay grounded and focused during this time. Stay in the present. Let's not catastrophize about, oh my goodness, I'm going to die, my family's going to die, we're never going to get through this, we will always be isolated at home. Is that really factual? And if you're finding that you're having these catastrophic thoughts, pull back, breathe, question, is that a fact or is that just my fear? We need to stretch and exercise regularly. That greatly helps manage our stress and anxiety during this time. There's many benefits, as we know, with exercise. It certainly decreases depressive symptoms. So we need to get out in nature, and we need to stretch, and we need to exercise. It's very helpful to meditate during this time. If you're faith-based, rely on your faith and check in with your other church members, your minister, again, if you're faith-based. Focus on connection and focus on staying in the present moment. We don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. Just last night, we hear that some of these restrictions are going to be lifted. Some of the states are going to be opening up now. So maybe we feared that it was never going to end. Well, today is a new day and there's new information. Mind your thoughts. We've talked about that. Really important to question when you see yourself going down that dark rabbit hole. Bring yourself back to the present. Challenge those negative thoughts and replace them with positive thoughts. Eat healthy meals. So important to keep our nutrition going. Feed our bodies with healthy foods so that we can keep our immune system healthy and we can stay safe and be able to help others. Next slide, please. Get plenty of sleep. So important to factor in a sleep routine. If you typically go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, keep that going. One thing we're going to talk about is workspace in a few minutes, and I really want to stress that to lower the risk of insomnia, do not work in your bedroom. Have a special space for work. Keep that bedroom sacred for sleep. So it's not associated with work and other stressful things that you might be contemplating. Keep it for sleep. We want to avoid alcohol and drugs. We talked about that. And you know what? It's a time to factor in joy. If our lives are very out of balance right now, we need to balance it out with joy, with pleasurable activities, things that we like to do, and again, bring us joy. That might be gardening, reading, bike riding, whatever that is for you. Be sure to factor in joy every single day. We need to connect, and reconnect. You know, we are social beings. As human beings, we crave connection. The old saying, no man is an island, and that couldn't be more true than right now. And so it's a great time to connect. Connect with your colleagues that are working from home. There's Zoom, there's Microsoft Teams, there's so many different ways. There's Facebook, there's FaceTime. So many ways that we can connect visually, certainly telephonically. It's a great time to think about people that you've always said in the past, gee, I wish I had more time to connect with my old high school buddies, or my friends that or in a former state that I've moved away from, that I've really lost touch with. Well, now's the perfect time to reconnect with them. That is healing, both for them and for you, to be able to share what's going on in each other's lives, share tips for how you're getting through it, and just remind each other that you're here for one another and you're not alone. It's really important to get outside, get out in nature. That helps ground us, keeps us in the present moment. You can breathe fresh air, even if it's just a stretch break. When you're working from home, you get up, you walk around your house, you walk around your neighborhood, go down at the end of the block and back. It really kind of changes the set and helps bring in some good feelings. In fact, research is sharing with us that 10 minutes being outside actually increases the feel-good hormones in our bodies, serotonin, dopamine. So what a great tonic to incorporate into our daily routines right now. Next slide, please. So working from home, how can we best work from home to best take care of our mental health? Well, remember we talked about control. Humans like control. We like structure. We like to know what's happening. So we need to create a new structure and a routine and then follow it. Develop a schedule. Predictability lowers our anxiety. Create a specified workplace. We talked about that, not in the bedroom. So when you get up and you shower, and that routine might be, my alarm goes off at 7. I get up and I shower. I groom, I dress, and I move to my workspace and I'm ready by 8 o'clock. Set yourself daily work goals and factor in breaks. Go outside. And factoring in goals makes you feel accomplished, doesn't it? At the end of the day, you can say, okay, this was on my to-do list. These are my work assignments. I've accomplished them and I feel good about myself. Next slide, please. If you're homeschooling on top of working from home, you need to develop a daily schedule for your children as well. You need to create a specific school or play space for them. Just as you have your specific space, let's create a specific space for them. So they know when they're going to their play space or they're going to their homework space, their school learning space, that's where they're going to go into gear and accomplish their daily goals. You need to really focus on modeling healthy coping strategies. It's okay if you're feeling anxious and overwhelmed, but reach out to a friend or a healthcare professional, a counselor, to talk about your own anxiety, because we want to reduce that transmission to the children, because as you well know, they're very intuitive, they're very sensitive, and they can pick up your feelings of distress, your feelings of anxiety, your feelings of being overwhelmed. And so we need to shield them as much as we possibly can from that. And so again, before you maybe interact with them, take some deep breaths, meditate, do whatever you need to do to ground and get in a good space for yourself so that they're not picking up your anxiety as much as possible. Maintain your own calm. And you know what? People are talking about the stress of keeping up with the homework assignments. Are they being the best mom or dad? Can they tutor with these assignments? Are the children really learning? Am I being an effective teacher? And you know what? I think the most important thing you can do right now with your child, sure, ABCs and arithmetic and learning are good, but the best thing you can do right now is maintain a loving, healthy relationship with your children while they're home. The ABCs and the arithmetic and all the different assignments and the learning tasks, they'll come, they'll catch up, but if you just focus on also maintaining healthy relationship, being as patient as you possibly can, I think that's going to go a long, long way to ensuring that your child comes through this unscathed as well. I want to talk about regression for a moment, because when children are stressed out, and they certainly have their routines that have been upended as well, a lot of different things that are happening now in their world that is very abnormal from what they're used to. You might see that your children regress. Maybe your 5-year-old is suddenly down on the floor throwing a tantrum as if he or she were 2 or 3. Expect that. That's their own way of expressing their stress and frustration as well. So extra patience is needed as we work with our children, as they too are having their feelings regarding this new normal. Next slide. You know, if we can pull ourselves up to 30,000 feet, as they say, and search for the growth and the lessons as we are moving through this very troubled time. There's a lot to be grateful for. There's a lot to focus on that is positive. And so if you can search for that, I think that would really increase your sense of well-being. It reminds me of this time in our lives. It reminds me of one of my favorite books, written by Viktor Frankl. And he was a psychiatrist. And this is a book that was written many decades ago, but it's an oldie but a goodie, and it's a classic. And the book is entitled A Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl was in a concentration camp during the Holocaust. And to keep his sanity, what he chose to focus on is to really observe human behavior. And he found it very interesting that sometimes, for example, when a guard would throw over a piece of crust into the camp, he found that some people would run up and grab that piece of crust and hoard it and keep it all by themselves and all for themselves. Other people that may have caught that piece of crust would say, "Hey, come here. I'm going to cut this up into 10 small bites so that I can share." He noticed that some people were in fetal positions saying, "What's the use? Why should I even eat the morsels that they're throwing us? We're all going to die." So he noticed various degrees and various presentations of human behavior. And what he learned from this, and the gist of his book, is that there is meaning in suffering. And if you can focus on those growth experiences, if you can focus on what you've learned as you've moved forward in this troubled time, that it really builds resilience and it helps to find meaning. And sometimes when we're in the height of this, it's very difficult to do that. But for example, journaling is one way that we can focus on the good things that are happening in our lives, the gratitude. In fact, maintaining a gratitude journal, research is showing that it actually alters brain structures as we move forward with gratitude journaling, and really increases those feel-good hormones and helps us to move from catastrophizing thoughts and focusing on the positive. So maybe you've learned that you have more patience than you ever dreamed you had. Maybe you learned, as you're factoring in some joy in your lives and you're picking up painting, for example, that you've always wanted to do but didn't have time for. Maybe you've learned that you're pretty skilled, you're pretty artistic. Maybe you've learned that your relationship with your partner has strengthened. Or maybe you've learned that it's really not as strong as you'd like it to be, and you've learned that it might be helpful to reach out for some couples counseling and strive to have a stronger relationship. There's many lessons that we can learn from one another and from our own family as we're going through this. We talked about focusing on gratitude. We need to stay grounded. And I want to talk a little bit about the power of the pen. You know, we are truly living through a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And this will be in the history books from decades and decades to come. And so what a better time to journal your own experience through this pandemic. When you first heard about it, what you did to prepare for it, what were your thoughts, your fears, your feelings as a result? How did you manage working from home? How did you manage homeschooling? And leaving this literally as a legacy for your loved ones, for your children, because these journals are very important, not only for you to get your thoughts out of the rumination and bringing it to light and then on paper, but it also can serve as such a precious legacy for those that you love, so that they can read and learn from you how you managed through a very stressful time and survived and thrived. I want to also talk about the power of giving, because you know the old saying, it's better to give than to receive. And at this time, so many people need support. We all need support. It's a great time to check on that elderly neighbor that perhaps you've never interacted with before. Perhaps you can bake a pie, bring a dish, leave it on his or her doorsteps. Perhaps you can make masks for those healthcare workers that are putting themselves and their lives at risk every single day to deal with those that are sick with this coronavirus. You know, at LSF, we have a mask force. I couldn't be more proud to work with the company that I do, LSF. And we formed a task force, a mask force actually, and people volunteered by the dozens to take their time and sew masks for those in need. Just a few examples of how when you focus on how can I give to others, you'd be surprised how that can really increase mood. This is a perfect time as well. I don't know about you, but I know that I used to say in my busy life, gosh, if I had more time, or I wish I had more time, because if I did, I would pick up painting again. I would exercise more. I would finish that book that is still sitting in manuscript form. We all have opportunities now. We have the time to fill in that blank. So think about it. If you had more time, what would you do? And then do it. And I want to emphasize again that you are not alone. if you're experiencing feelings of anxiety, frustration, anger, depression, you're not alone. And I also want to emphasize that it's a sign of strength to reach out and get additional support. Perhaps your company has an employee assistance program. I know we do at LSF, and it's a lifesaver. An employee assistance program are benefits that you can tap into to have a professional that can serve you, that can help you navigate through this time. And right now, I know throughout our network at LSF Health Systems, our 62 provider organizations have pivoted and are offering telehealth. So you don't have to obviously go to an office. We can't do that right now, but we can receive the support through telehealth, and it's very, very effective. So please reach out for that additional support. Next slide. I just wanted to share some of my favorite quotes, kind of tying in what we talked about thus far today. One is, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Another, the greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. And those who really focus on the future, our future lies in uncertainty. So it really emphasizes our need to live immediately, live in the now, live in the present moment. And finally, freedom and happiness are won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And we certainly do have a lot of things that are lying outside of our control, but we also have a lot of things that are within our control, and we need to really focus on that. Next slide, please. So I think now we wanted to leave some time for questions, and very happy to answer any questions that I can. And if I can't, I'm happy to research and get back to you. I also want to mention that you're going to be receiving a link. And also, I know that Karina can also send an email. With this presentation, I've also included a coronavirus anxiety workbook. And coincidentally, we at LSF Health Systems have a very robust training institute. And we also have a grant now where we are training certified recovery peer specialists. Those individuals that have lived experience, they have struggled with mental health and/or substance abuse disorders, and they are now taking the required 40-hour curriculum to become certified recovery peer specialists to help others navigate through their life struggles. And the author of this coronavirus anxiety workbook is actually one of our graduates, and she's now in South Florida, and she has pulled from our curriculum that we provide during our 40-hour courses. And so we couldn't be more proud. And I hope that you find that very helpful. It's very easy to read, to follow, and another tool in your toolbox to be able to get through this pandemic with good mental health.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Cauffield. Thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed particularly what you said about remembering to factor in joy and the gratitude practice, which I've found personally very helpful in my anxiety struggles, and particularly now when the anxiety is a little bit through the roof. We have a question from Robert Haley, and Robert asks, you mentioned the tip about not working from your bedroom, but now that our homes have become our workplace, do you have any tips on maintaining a balance between work and home now that we are in both places 24/7?
That's a great question, Rob. And I think that it's really important to schedule your daily work schedule, but factoring in stretch breaks, factoring in getting outside, doing some exercise, take your lunch break just as you would if you were working at the office. Try to factor in as much of a normal work schedule and routine as you can during the working hours. And then on the off times when you're not working, your day has ended, then relax into factoring in some of those joyful activities that you enjoy. Have a steady time that you have dinner, for example, and again, limit that news watching. Put on a movie, order a movie. Gosh, there's so many YouTube opportunities as well for various classes, yoga classes, meditation apps that you can put on your phones if you like to meditate. So really, the key is balance. And so we're working 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever your work schedule or your day looks like. Then we need to balance that out and feed our minds, feed our souls with things that are going to make us feel better and enhance our mental health.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Cauffield. We have another question from Amelia Fox. And Amelia asks, if you don't feel like you have more time, but rather that you have less time, what are the top things you might recommend for that?
That's a great question as well, Amelia. We're going to have to then prioritize, keeping in mind that now more than ever, it's really important to balance as much as we can. So balance work, balance that out with joy. Balance the homeschooling, for example, with break times, getting outside with your child, going on a bike ride, whatever you can do to have that balance so that you're not 90% focused on work, 90% focused on homeschooling, whatever that is. We need to chunk our days and bring in as much varied activity as we can.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so we've got another question coming in from Charlie. Charlie asks, do you believe there will be a greater need for mental health assistance after social distancing is over? And what might the next steps challenge in us?
Yes, Charlie, we are absolutely flooded right now. And I definitely anticipate that there will be an even greater need, particularly as we're going through uncertain times with job security. When people lose their jobs, they oftentimes lose their health insurance. And so at LSF Health Systems, we serve those that are indigent, uninsured, or underinsured. I know that there will be new populations now coming into our system of care that previously had insurance. Unfortunately, during times like these, natural and man-made disasters, pandemics, what we find in the mental health field is we find a greater need for mental health and substance abuse counseling. We find an increase, unfortunately, in suicides, increase in domestic violence, an increase in child abuse, an increase in relapsing. We have a lot of folks that have enjoyed recovery for months, years, and suddenly find themselves triggered by these stressors and go back to their old habits of utilizing alcohol and other drugs to cope with their pain, their fears. So yes, we will definitely see an uptick in the need for our services. And I'm so grateful that LSF is here. One of our missions is to help individuals that are struggling with mental health and substance abuse disorders. And the good news is that treatment works and there is help available. So I don't want anybody to be despairing or feel that there's no way out of this, that you'll never feel normal again. You can and you will.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cauffield. We've got a couple of more questions coming in. The next one is from Maribel Rodales. And Maribel asks, what are the resources to help prevent domestic violence? Now that children and families are more at home in Tampa Bay, are there any mental health immediate services for them?
Yes, there are. Our domestic violence shelters are open. They're operating. They understand the increased risk for domestic violence because the victim is now sequestered, if you will, having to isolate at home. Typically, the perpetrator is typically has issues with substance abuse, and that certainly goes hand in hand with domestic violence. So help is available to you. The domestic violence hotline is available 24/7. Your local shelters are available and accepting victims and their children. So please know that you do not have to remain in an unsafe environment. There is help and readily available to get you through this. Keep you safe.
Thank you so much, Maribel, for asking that very important question, Dr. Cauffield, for answering that. Another question we have from Valerie Gordon. Can you tell us about the importance of the service providers and helpers asking for and taking the time to receive help?
It's paramount. As you saw in the PowerPoint presentation, they are one of the more at-risk individuals for needing help. You know, it's very traumatic to watch somebody that you are prepared to serve and you want to serve that is in such distress, those that are on ventilators, those that are not going to be able to survive this virus. And our healthcare providers are seeing this every single day. And that's traumatic for them to feel so out of control, so helpless, and a lot of times feeling inadequate. And maybe I didn't do the right thing for that patient, or maybe I could have done more. And so absolutely, there's a great need to let our frontline healthcare providers know that they too can benefit from counseling, and they need to be minding their own mental health, and they need to seek support as they're going through this, just like everybody else.
Thank you again so much for that very, very important topic at this time for many people in the health services fields. I have a question. We've got another question coming in, but I want to put this out there. I think it'll be very widely applicable. I know a lot of my friends and family are dealing with this with their children. Many people are dealing with family stress on top of job stress. And do you have any tips on how to talk to children during this time, especially if you're a parent that themselves is dealing with anxiety?
Yes, that's a great question. And, you know, we have to be mindful that children go through different developmental stages. And based on their age, it depends upon how much information that they can truly understand. A teenager, for example, You might get more into the details about the virus and the research and those kinds of topics with a teenager that, has the developmental capacity to understand and to process that information, as opposed to a 5-year-old who really doesn't particularly need all that information. I think for a 5-year-old at their developmental stage, what they're most interested in is, am I going to be safe? Is mommy going to be safe? Is daddy going to be safe? And so more reassurance along those lines, and not the media overload, because children, young children, when they see something going on in the news, they can't process that. Oh, that was yesterday, or that was a week ago. When they see it, it's like, oh, that's happening now. And so again, I would minimize the media exposure to children, and depending upon how old the child is, I would monitor, how much information you share. I would, again, remain calm. I certainly understand that moms and dads are very anxious now themselves, but as much as you can reassure that, hey, we're in this together, we're family, we're strong, we're going to get through this, and it's okay if you're afraid, and I want to hear about your feelings. I want you to talk about them. Perhaps give them some artwork. Why don't you draw me a picture of how you're feeling right now? And those kinds of tools to allow the children to feel heard and be able to process their feelings while you're maintaining a sense of safety and calmness as much as possible.
Great, thank you. So we've got just a couple minutes left and one last question. This is great for anybody that's in a leadership position at their workplace. Are there any triggers or signals that a manager or supervisor might see in their employees that anxiety is increasing to unhealthy levels, and how should they respond? And that question comes from Amelia.
Yes, that's a great question, Amelia. And if you have colleagues that are quite emotional and not able to regulate those emotions, for example, they're crying, they're not seeming to be able to focus on their work, they are perhaps making statements such as, what's the point? Life's not worth living anymore. Or I'm never going to get out of this mess. Or my husband's been fired and it's the end of the world for us. Those kinds of fatalistic types of comments need to be taken very seriously. And if you have those feelings, that sense that you have a colleague that's really struggling, go with your gut. You know that person, you know how they typically present, and now you've seen a change. You've seen a change in their behavior, you've seen a change in what comments that they're offering, and so on. You've seen a change in their emotional regulation. Definitely reach out, share the EAP resources for them. Let them know that you're there for them, offer the additional support. Ask those tough questions. If you're feeling like you have an employee that is suicidal, you need to ask that question. Gee, I'm really concerned about some of the things that you're sharing with me today. Are you thinking about taking your own life? How are you coping right now? And if they answer that, yes, I'm not feeling like life's worth living, then you need to call 911. You need to get that person some help, because this is a very tough time. As I shared earlier, suicides are on the rise, and some people that struggle with mental health and substance abuse disorders, they're seeing their symptoms escalate You might not even know that your colleague, has a mental health or substance abuse issue. But now you're seeing the symptoms escalate, and so take it seriously. And it's a myth to think that if you ask that tough question, are you thinking about harming yourself, that's going to spur them on to complete that suicide. That couldn't be farther from the truth. That's a myth. What that actually does when you're acknowledging their pain, when you're asking that tough question, people that are in that situation respond later that they were so relieved that you noticed that they were really struggling, that you noticed that they were thinking about harming themselves. You got them the help that they needed, and they expressed relief and gratitude.
Wow, well, thank you again for an extremely thorough answer to that question. And it looks like we've reached our time. And I want to thank you again, Dr. Cauffield, for sharing your incredibly informative and timely presentation. And thank you to everybody that's on the call today and for participating. We'll be sharing the recording and presentation early next week. And please reach out to us if you have any questions. Keep your eye out for upcoming webinars.
Thank you so much.